Welcome to ZKast, everybody. I'm Zeus Caraval from ZK Research. I'll be your host as always. I'm joined by a very interesting person, Teddy Bekele, the CTO of Land O'Lakes. But we're going to be talking rural broadband and a couple other things. Before we get started, though, I want to give a quick shout out to eWeek, my media partner. All ZKasts are done in conjunction with the eWeek eSpeaks series. So Teddy, thanks for joining today. Why don't you just give a quick introduction of yourself, what you do for Land O'Lakes?
Sounds good. And first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you. So I'm Teddy Bekele. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Land O'Lakes. So I'm responsible for anything technology within our organization and rely on a very strong team to be able to deliver value both to our customers as well as to our employees. Ultimately, my job really breaks up into three areas. One is around the kind of maintaining all the systems for our organization. The second is around the digital transformation of our company and how we go to market and working with our businesses on that one. And the third one, which is really the most interesting and be a large part of our conversation here, is how do we use technology for good? And how do we use it for our members? How do we use it with customers in ways that are super interesting and really benefiting the society? And really bringing rural broadband as a specific example is one of the areas we focus on quite a bit. We're a farmer-owned cooperative, farm to fork. So our members are made up of dairy producers, about 2,000 of them, and these ag retailers that are in rural communities, and there's nearly 1,000 of those. And they work with all the different farmers in those communities, and we touch about 300,000 farmers and half of the harvested acres in the United States. So a lot of big footprint in rural communities. And so we see the problem of what happens in those communities, as well as through our Land O'Lakes consumer products goods, butter and cheese that most people recognize it for. We also touch a lot of different consumers. So our goal really is, how do you connect that consumer with the farmer, and how do you bridge that digital divide?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that Land O'Lakes has taken the task of trying to do the world some good seriously. I think this is something that we've seen a big pivot in from companies, some companies just donate money, but it sounds like you guys are taking action now. I know Land O'Lakes was the founding member, in fact, of a project called the American Connection Project, or ACP. Explain what ACP is and what it does, and why it was important for Land O'Lakes to get involved.
Absolutely. And this is something we started actually even before the pandemic, but really got accentuated during the pandemic and when everything started, right? Like I said, we saw this problem of, we're trying to bring technology to rural communities. And, through the efforts of our businesses, obviously using technology in day-to-day work for productivity is critical. Whether you're in a dairy barn, or whether you're feeding animals on the farm, or you're planting seeds and harvesting those crops, right? So there's lots of technology that happens in that space. But what we saw is, because no matter what kind of interesting tools we developed, when you tried to deploy it to those folks in those rural communities, a lot of them didn't have the opportunity to use it because they didn't have the broadband highway to leverage. And so ultimately they would say, I'd love all the stuff you're bringing to us, but I can't take advantage of it. So I'm still stuck back in the Stone Age, not being able to do things. In addition to that, we also saw that, there was educational barriers, right? If somebody wanted to do some long distance learning, and obviously when you live in a rural community, getting somewhere, there's quite a bit of a drive, and they weren't able to do that. Weren't able to connect with a doctor. And when the pandemic hit, that really got accentuated, because now the kids were staying at home and having to do homework from there. Or where some people were trying to get in touch with a doctor instead of having to go in an emergency room and drive 80 miles. They want to connect with loved ones and conduct their work on a day-to-day basis. So all that just really amplified during the pandemic and really accelerated some of our work. So the American Connection Project really is an initiative really focused in three areas. Number one is awareness, just like you and I are doing right now, talking about the lack of broadband in rural communities. And we know that there's, today the FCC will say something that's 18 million households that don't have internet connectivity. And that number is true. But if you go a little bit deeper, actually that number might expand to 42 or 50 million. And a large part of those individuals live in those rural communities, right? So that's something that was kind of matching with what we were seeing. So how do we raise awareness? The second one was advocacy. How can we get more other organizations like ours to understand this problem and become advocates? So we created a coalition, and there's about 170 companies or more. Actually, we're higher than that today, that are part of this coalition. And we're all advocating, working both at the state and federal level to be able to push more funding into this broadband space, to be able to create subgroups around education, broadband, education, healthcare, and even connectivity from a productivity standpoint. So that was the sort of advocacy piece. And the third one was really around action. Let's do something, right? And when during the pandemic, we took a lot of our locations, and a lot of our partners in the coalition also took a lot of their location and enabled guest Wi-Fi. So if you're near one of these locations, you could go to the parking lot and be able to use that the internet that way. And we saw a huge spike as soon as people became aware of that service. We're also working today with companies like Microsoft to be able to put antennas on towers and be able to propagate the signal that way and offer broadband in a more unique fashion. And then we're also started an initiative called the American Connection Corps, which we're putting fellows in these communities and making sure that they can fully take advantage of these capabilities. So that's the American Connection Project, sort of in a nutshell, but lots of work going on with lots of different individuals, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's funny, rural broadband has been a hot button topic of mine for the better part of the last decade. As a nation, I almost think we should be embarrassed at the state of high-speed broadband in this country. We're the most technically advanced country in the world. We invent everything, but yet we can't get basic internet connectivity to a big part of the country. So why is that? What exactly is the problem? Why is there still such a big gap in connectivity speeds in different parts of the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, at the end of the day, it comes out to it's unaffordable for some of the providers to be able to provide fiber or even some sort of a connectivity in these communities, because you're in a rural area. The terrain is diverse, right? So you have lakes, you have trees, you have mountains, you have valleys. And so putting fiber down in the ground is not as simple. As well as once you put it in the ground, because the households are so spaced apart, right? Like miles away. And then sometimes even the household is not just off the road, it's another half mile off the road. And so you started to dig in a line, and we're talking about costs that could be anywhere around $40,000 a mile, right? To put that fiber down. And that becomes, when you're looking at a rural community, just becomes for a broadband provider, like we'd love to be able to connect everybody in this county or everybody in this region of the state, but it's just not financially feasible for us. We would be completely upside down. That's why sort of the federal side and some of the funding could help with those type of pieces, because broadband, as you and I know today, it's a basic need, right? Just like in the 30s, we had electricity, and then we had phone lines and water. Like, we need to have the same thing with broadband today, because that's just how work gets done. That's how education, healthcare, all those kind of fun things come together, including what's interesting with this productivity piece on the work side, climate change, right? So we have tools that we deploy out in the field today that can help farmers become more sustainable on their field with providing them good agronomic insights and giving them good practices, but they need the technology to be able to execute upon that. And without it, they're not able to do so. And they could have a huge impact on being carbon sinks in the future, or even reducing some of their emissions at the moment. And they could be a good solution for climate change in the future.
Yeah, I think in this country too, with all the social issues going on, I think in good quality internet and education is the great equalizer in the world, right? We've seen that in different parts of the world, and it's funny because in this country we can't do it. Now, you touched on a number of government initiatives. I know the government itself has pledged billions of dollars, right? Although there's still a big problem. Get that money rolled out hasn't been easy. And so there was a need for private initiatives like this. I think we can't just, companies like yourself, I suppose, are saying that you can't just sit back and wait for the government to do something. You're trying to augment that. So explain to me how initiatives like ACP are kind of filling that gap between what the government programs are.
Yeah, again, I don't envy the job of the folks in DC that have to figure out how to solve this problem, right? Because different states have different requirements, have different needs. They're in different states of different levels of maturity, right? And to figure all that out. But I think that's our job from a private standpoint. We can step in and provide some of that insight, some of that expertise. So I today, for example, sit on a task force that's a joint task force between the USDA and the FCC focused on precision ag connectivity. letting them know, here are the technologies coming in the future. Here's the demands for broadband going forward. So some of the minimum or the standards you've established today may not be enough. They may need to be higher. And by the way, when you deploy some of these programs out, whether it's various agencies, unless you have a coordinated effort, not only amongst the federal agencies, but also with the states, this funding is not going to go in the direction you need it to go. So here are some interesting ways where you could deploy this, and we provide sort of that feedback and those recommendations back to the government agency. So that's one way you can collaborate. Another one is, like I said earlier, like our companies, like we work with a number of those 1,000 retailers in those rural communities, and they have high altitude infrastructure, right? So grain silos, fertilizer plants, and we say, look, we know part of the cost of deploying this is land as well as a tall infrastructure. We may have some of those things in place, so let's work together with you, and we will reduce the cost of bringing some sort of a broadband connection into those rural communities. And that's one way you can work with private agencies. I know companies like Tractor Supply, for example, have also done interesting things where they've said, look, somebody downloads the Tractor Supply app in one of the stores, they will donate $1 towards this cause, right? So that's another way of a private company be able to contribute back to the larger cause. So those are all exciting things. And I think when you have that private-public partnership and they hold hand in hand, we can solve big problems like this.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you brought up like the high altitude silos and things like that. It's funny, the different places that I see technology being used, like IoT and things. I was in Vermont last year, and I ran into the small little syrup farm that had IoT enabled their syrup vats, because the farmer was telling me that he constantly have to run back and forth to see if it was full. Now through a simple app on his phone, he can tell very quickly, when it's getting full. He's a lot more efficient that way. And so IoT is being used everywhere today, including on these farms. And it's really become kind of a game changer. So now you mentioned Tractor Supply Company, right? They joined Land O'Lakes, an organization that's helped with bring a lot of major retailer deployments for free Wi-Fi. But what, and you mentioned Microsoft, what are some of the other vendors that are helping you with these deployments?
So we have a number of, like I said, there's healthcare companies in it, like a Mayo Clinic, for example, or Central Care. But we also have big technology companies like HP that have participated in this, and they've offered up some of the infrastructure that we use. Actually, it was a huge help when the pandemic was going on, and like I said, we had those 3,000 plus locations that were offering guest Wi-Fi, where we had to have routers out, and it was routers that had to be able to reach the parking lots, right? So again, you want it to be safe. You didn't want people to come into the building and cause more issues for themselves and others in the building. So from the parking lot, from the safety of your car, be able to access internet, and good, reliable internet, right? You don't want it to be all choppy and kind of breaking up and all that, especially if somebody's going there. And a number of people did, not only to talk to a doctor, but to attend a class, right? That you're doing homework and listening to the teacher and all those types of things. So partners like that kind of stepped up and were able to offer what they could with their expertise in that space. And we were able to deploy that during the pandemic, and we continue now. Now, even as we go and continue to deploy some of these towers and some of these capabilities, those are the technologies we're using. And that's exciting that everybody recognizes the problem. And it doesn't matter. What was interesting is it didn't matter what sector you belonged in or what industry you were focused on. Like, there was a way for you to contribute. And that's how we got to this, 170 plus members in this coalition, which I thought is very exciting. And also applaud every single organization that decided, yep, we understand this problem and we want to be able to support and participate and help kind of solve that. So yes, very, very exciting.
Yeah, and when you mentioned HP, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, I believe from my notes on this on the initiative, you were talking about specifically with the Aruba group within HP, right? The company that makes Wi-Fi. And I wanted to drill down on that a little bit, because obviously Wi-Fi connects everything today, but it's becoming more and more advanced. In fact, I think I read somewhere in a study that millennials would rather give up their car than Wi-Fi, right? So it's become an integrated part of our life. Can you just drill down a little bit on what Aruba is doing and how important have they been to the success of this initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have mentioned that. I mean, obviously the Aruba networking, they're kind of the remote capabilities that they offered us were critical, right? So again, for us to be able to see where the infrastructure was deployed, how it was performing. And also, I mean, we had to since the first day we enabled the first Wi-Fi location, right, we had to keep track of, how many people were coming, what was the traffic looking like, did we have the bandwidth to be able to kind of serve the population there, did we have to add an extra router, did we have to bring more bandwidth to the building itself, right? So we were able, without having to, obviously there were some folks that were at that location, but really most of the heavy lifting was done kind of from our central, from headquarters here in Minnesota, right? So we were able to see what was going on and where we needed to make adjustments, and be able to work with the local folks to be able to do that. And the Aruba solution is really what helped us do a lot of that in the process. So it was great. It was an awesome experience for us. And really, I mean, it's a relationship we had even before the pandemic, but, we talk about all the capabilities and all the things they can bring to the table. But it really shined during that time, right? Because now, not only were we doing it to run our normal business and the normal kind of infrastructure we have for our company, but now we were offering it to a much broader base and for a much different reason.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned, I think you just mentioned that you had familiarity with Aruba before. And did that factor into you choosing them to assist with ACP, or did they just step up and do that, on their own?
No, I think it was a combination of both, right? So it was, one is we had the relationship, we knew what their capabilities were, but when we got into this situation, we actually, talked to a number of our partners and said, we're trying to go solve this problem, and they certainly stepped up and said, we can certainly help you in the space. Here's actually. Beyond what you know about us today, here's what we could do in addition to that. And here's how we can help you support some of the efforts you're trying to put out there. And so they were critical in helping us do that. So yes, we had the relationship, but they certainly stepped up during the time of need.
Yeah, well, that's certainly good to see. I mean, a lot of these companies are, very big. They make a lot of infrastructure. So it's nice to see them redirecting that back into making the country a better place in so many different ways. Now, ACP, the initiative has been ongoing for a little bit. Can you point to any recent successes you've had and some proof points for how the program has been working?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, we just recently, it's been a couple months now, things are moving so fast, but we just deployed the American Connection Core, right? So part of what we saw is, okay, broadband is required. We need it in these rural communities. We know funding will come at some point. We know we need to deploy it, the infrastructure and the base technology. But the other piece was, well, is there an affordability issue in these communities, right? If it's available, are they going to take advantage of it? Do they know how to take advantage of it? Where's the first place? Okay, let's say there is funding and this county is going to get connected. Where would be the first, places to deploy this capability? So what we quickly found out was that, we could have, we created a program called the American Connection Core, made up of 50 fellows that really were recently, graduated students from colleges or whoever else who needed to apply, but primarily in that age range that wanted to go back to their hometowns and be able to contribute and give back. So we kind of got, going through an interview process and got 52 different individuals. And now they're going back in these communities and really becoming the evangelists for why we need broadband there, how to get it deployed, get folks to understand, look, if there's an affordability issues, here's some programs you can apply for and bring down that cost on a monthly basis. Here's how you can best use it. Here's how to get it set up if that's what's needed, right? And it's been hugely successful, and we've deployed it across 12 states, and kind of now talking about the second batch of fellows that we may put out there with working with Lead Fund of America. So very exciting, and so that's been a huge success for us, as well as there's right now. I mean, I think I would say from a broadband need perspective, when you look at the dollars that are being discussed, right, at the federal level to be deployed in these communities, we've been talking somewhere around 80 to 100 billion is what's needed to close the gap. And there is, in the latest infrastructure package, there is about $80 billion. And it's a bipartisan alignment on that piece. There may be some disagreements in other areas, but when it comes to this piece, there's actually like alignment and cooperation from the different government entities, which is very exciting for us.
Yeah. Well, that is good to hear because, there's really very few things in the world today that are bipartisan issues. So, but this is one that should be. And although I've always said never underestimate the government's ability to not get along with each other. So, but it sounds like in this area, they're all aligned. So now you've got some recent proof points, the initiatives going on. What's next for you?
So next, I think is, let's, now that let's get broadband in there, let's take advantage of it, right? Part of it is, for example, like, when we talk about why, and you mentioned it at the beginning, why do we care about broadband in rural communities? Yes, we're a technologically advanced nation, and we should be able to do this, right? I mean, it should just be a right for every citizen of the country. Absolutely. But secondly, I mean, like, when you look at rural communities, I mean, that's the source of food, fuel, and fiber for the entire country, right? So, and it touches us in one shape or form. So we need those communities to be technologically savvy and to be able to take advantage of the latest technologies. I'm not now talking really latest technologies, edge computing, artificial intelligence, right? Blockchain, if that's the case, especially around the traceability perspective. How do we deploy these type of capabilities into those rural communities? And what's super interesting is, as the farmers become more technologically advanced, the community around them becomes technologically advanced, because they're going to need help from folks to run some of the equipment potentially remotely. It brings more capability even from tech companies back into these communities. You need to deploy, if it's doing telemedicine, and we could even have a center that's sort of autonomous without having somebody be there, but somebody show up and be able to use the equipment and be able to interact with the doctors if they were really there. So we can unlock all of that, right? So now the question is, okay, how do we make that happen? There's great visions and what we want to do there, but we want to make sure that that comes to life. So that is probably the next step for us in this evolution. And I think it's exciting. I think there's lots of fun things we could do, and get even the younger generation to be excited into farming again. That would be super exciting for me. And I live in an urban community, and I have 2 kids, and would love for them to aspire to somehow be connected to agriculture and do something, even if they didn't live in a rural area.
Yeah, well, I suppose sort of the technical advancement of that industry would help get more young people interested in it. I think it's been an industry that's been lacking innovation for a long time, but clearly everything's set up for it now. So hopefully that'll happen. Anyways, Teddy from CTO of Analytics, I want to thank you for joining me. And I also want to thank you for all the work you and your company are doing in this to try and bring broadband to the rural areas of this country. It seems like you've got a full-time job already with Land O'Lakes, and this you're doing on the side of the as part of your job, but also I know it's a topic that you care about. So thank you very much for that. If more people were willing to do that, I think this issue wouldn't be a problem. So
no, thank you for having me and being able to tell the story. And by the way, it's these types of opportunities where we can talk about not only the issue, what we could do about it, but also the possibilities of the future that are exciting. And you're helping us do that. So thank you.
Okay, well, keep up the good work. And that wraps up our ZKast, everybody. Don't forget to click the subscribe, and I'll see you next week.